EU and Western leaders have come up with a new strategy, a new bold strategy. As you know, they've been having various conferences across the world. They had the G7 is basically what they were just finishing up with today. You're also going to have the NATO summit coming up in Madrid. That is starting either today or tomorrow. We're going to have Wyatt on to discuss. But, of course, the issue and the conversation is all going to center around the issue of Ukraine and the quandary that Western governments have basically gotten themselves into. That they have a vital resource that they need, that the cost of that vital resource has basically gone through the roof as a direct result of the actions that they themselves have taken in regards to the sanction war that they decided to wage. It is making their economy scream, especially with issues of inflation, issues of food, energy, etc., etc. And to make matters worse, as opposed to hurting the Russian economy, well, Russia has been getting, $20 billion extra a month in regards to oil and gas. That basically, yes, you've sanctioned that particular product, and even though the values have gone down, as a direct result of the volumes going down, and as a direct result of those sanctions, price goes up. Price goes up. And so they end up making more while we get poorer, colder, and this issue of stagflation is staring us in the face. I mean, this is somewhat significant in regards to the damage and the pain that the various Western governments are taking. And to make matters worse, keep in mind, this is not a situation where this is happening in a vacuum. In the same way that Western governments have decided to gouge themselves in the genitals on this issue of energy, China and India has decided to take advantage of it and make additional deals on that very specific point of energy for discounts. So, whereas China and India can, let's say, rev up their economies based on this kind of new, cheaper energy that they're getting this deal, Western economies have to pay more on it, and not just pay more on it, that's assuming they even have access to it in the first place, considering they're basically going through their reserves. I mean, I don't know if they ever took the moment to think to themselves, if we do X, Moscow will do Y. If they did do that, that's a certain level of idiocy associated with that is just breathtaking. But all things being equal, in the very particular capacity that we're in now, they don't seem to have an out. And that was the last video I did with the conversation between Emmanuel Macron and Joe Biden, where Macron is telling him Saudi Arabia and Qatar cannot increase, UAE cannot increase in the way that we basically need them to increase the fuel. We're screwed. There is no way out. This is a hall of mirrors. And if they are indeed screwed, and this is a hall of mirrors, and Nord Stream 1 has basically lowered the amount that they're supplying by 60%, this seems irreconcilable to me. And yet, this is where we are. Instead of them thinking to themselves, what will be the direct result to our local economies of the plan that we are deciding to take? We are deciding, making a choice to take. That calculus either wasn't there, or that calculus was comically in the weeds, where it was a level of wishful thinking and hubris by the various leaders without ensuring that the various governments themselves and the local economies themselves could sustain the very policy that they were basically pushing forth. It's astonishing. I'm going to show you the new scheme that they've come up with. Price caps. Now they've decided upon price caps. This scheme reeks of a level of desperation and wishful thinking that on some level betrays they have no out. They have no solution. If this is what they're coming up with as a solution, and mind you, this is after 4 months? So now you found the silver bullet after 4 months. No, what I suspect is more likely to be true is this ignoble pattern where they basically come up with a new harebrained scheme without necessarily venturing to literally and honestly and legitimately regard the consequences and the potential consequences of that scheme. I suspect this is just another perpetuation of that they've worked themselves into such a miserable decision space that wishful thinking has to take account over analysis in and of itself. Because very easily, with a tiny bit of thought, this falls apart. And maybe this is just the politics of it all, to make it look like their local economies, that they're basically doing something in order to try to absolve themselves. Maybe not necessarily a blame of the things that are taking place. Yeah, of course they're going to blame Putin. But from their own local economies who are basically looking at them as various leaders of the countries and saying, you are injuring us. Do something about this. Maybe this is basically domestic politics played on a global stage to make it look as if something is taking place, even though all of them may know this isn't going anywhere. In fact, I would even go so far as to say it would make it worse. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, like, share, subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. This video is not going to be long, but I do want to kind of point out what they are thinking up, what this new harebrained scheme, this new shiny object that is totally going to do what they needed to do now, even though the other shiny objects didn't necessarily work in the way that they thought those shiny objects were going to work. So what is the new shiny object? Price caps. Price caps. This is Janet Yellen's idea of price caps. So, before getting into what they're talking about for price caps, just current where we are now, right now. Because I need to give context on why I'm saying the price cap thing is nonsense. Currently, in our world, Russia export revenue jumped some 50% since the beginning of 2022, Bloomberg reports, citing data from the International Energy Agency. According to the agency's monthly market report, Moscow has earned some $20 billion each month this year from sales of crude oil and oil-related products. That is after and as a direct result of the sanction war. European gas prices. Prices for natural gas in Europe have continued to climb amid Russian gas flow disruption via Nord Stream 1 pipeline. The prices rose above $1,500 per thousand cubic meters on Thursday for the first time since March. The prices of July futures at the TTF hub in the Netherlands reached $1,504 per thousand cubic meters after closing at $1,367 for the days before. Quote, further price climbs could strike sudden in case of any new developments surrounding Russian gas deliveries, unquote. Energy Denmark analysts seen or said in a note by Bloomberg. All right, put a pin in that. Keep going. In the U.S., fuel costs 70%, gas 48%, used cars 35%. This is inflation. Hotels 29%, airfare 24%, utility gas 22%, bacon 18%, oranges, furniture 18% and 16%, beef 16%, new cars 13%, chicken 13%, milk 13%, appliances 12%, fish 11%, eggs 11%, coffee 11%, food at home 10%. Think about what that means. When I was growing up and any increase in costs was just a disaster. This is increases basically across the board in costs. Didn't have to be this way. And by the way, this is going to get worse, especially as fertilizer become one of the new areas that is going to front into problems. This is what the population in this country is incurring as a direct result of the policies that Joe Biden has taken. This idea of we got to pay for our values. Okay, yeah, but we're the ones who are paying for their values, because I wager to you, dollars to donuts, that the overwhelming majority of the population in no way believes that this is a good policy. They don't buy it. And I suspect that's why Joe Biden's poll rating is down to, 30-something% in the way that it is now. When you ask the regular public, do you believe that all of this economic pain, potential stagflation, or for that matter, a recession, is worth keeping a Nazi-inspired coup government in place? Do you think those things are worth it? The answer is going to be no. Decisively so. And yet, here we are. And that same question, that same dilemma, that same inability to kind of articulate an explanation for why the various publics, either in Europe or the United States, care that much about Ukraine to the point where we were willing to knock over the government, and now willing to basically bring the world to the brink of oblivion in order to keep it going. Not to mention the damage to the local economies. How are you going to explain that? Which is why I keep saying political instability is on the way. Let's keep going. Speaking of political instability, French inflation set to near 7% as services dive prices. French inflation rate will keep climbing to stabilize between 6.5% and 7% in the fall as wages and services interact with prices to drive higher, country statistic agency INSEE said. Now, already this is leading to political instability with Macron losing his governing majority and a grab bag of right-wing and left-wing parties, particularly Mélenchon, who's skeptical of NATO. I don't think that's a feature. I don't think that's a bug. I think that's more of a feature. Let's keep going. Spain. Inflation rises, quickens, raising prices on the ECB. Consumer prices jumped 8.5% in May. Economists saw 8.3%. Let's keep going. Car industry faces 50% increase in energy bills. Let's keep going. Powell warning surprises could be in store on inflation. Okay, what does Powell mean by that? Powell told Senate Banking Committee on Wednesday he doesn't expect gas or grocery prices to go down as a result of the Fed's campaign of rate hikes, which are designed to dampen spending but can't help fix insufficient supply. Quote, there's not really anything we can do about oil prices, unquote, he said. They're set at the global level. Powell said inflation wouldn't be this high right now without strong demand for goods and services by American consumers, but he also stressed that global supply chains are still experiencing strains which the Fed doesn't have the tools to address. And surging food prices, quote, would certainly be much lower, unquote, if it not for the war in Ukraine. This is policy. It's not act of God. Nobody forced NATO to expand. Nobody forced the Minsk agreements to go unfulfilled. Nobody forced the Western powers to invite Ukraine into NATO or take this maximalist position or inflame what they knew were tensions in the country itself over this notion of NATO membership, or for that matter, being closer to the East, meaning closer to Russia or the United States or Europe. Nobody told him to do that. All of those things were basically provocative actions, even at the very last, where it's to say you're not going to be part of NATO. And whereas all of these guys were telling Zelensky behind the scenes that they weren't, none of them would say it aloud. None of that needed to take place. Even from the standpoint of the economic war, that was something that the West decided to launch to destroy the Russian economy. What is happening in this picture that I'm showing of basic economic calamity is our current world. This is where the West is stepping into. And I haven't even hit like Montenegro and some of the other countries that are basically saying it will be an apocalypse to try to eliminate oil, and specifically, for the matter, gas. Let's keep going. Speaking of that, German industry, this is the world's largest chemical plant, is threatening to shut down as a result of the lack of energy. Right here, the world's most largest industrial companies built the business model around cheap and plentiful Russian natural gas, which it used to generate power and as feedstock for products that make into toothpaste, medicines, and cars. Today, the dwindling Russian gas supplies are proving a threat to the company's vast manufacturing hub, the world's largest integrated chemical complex, spanning some 20 plants. Meaning, because of the sanctions that are taking place, this company, the largest energy company, one of the largest in the world, may go belly up. It may go belly up. Let's keep going. There's more. Germany could be forced to close down entire industrial sectors if there's a nationwide gas stoppage. Economic Minister Robert Habeck told Der Spiegel on Friday, this was a few weeks ago, quote, all factory activities will be suspended. It will be a disaster for some industries, and we are not talking about 2 days or weeks, but a long time. We are talking about people who will lose their jobs in regions that will lose entire industrial complexes. Habeck said, this is Germany freaking out. Oh my God, we're going to lose industries. Here's another one. This is the UK. Energy bills set to hit £3,000 in October, warned Scottish Power boss, who fears 10 million homes will be unable to afford heating this winter. This is Europe. This is Europe. Here's another one from the UK. Grim times lie ahead for the UK as inflation combines with low growth. This is a threat of stagflation that he is basically talking about. And by the way, going back to Powell for a moment, you realize, well, they're increasing interest rates. What they're trying to do is basically dampen economic activity. Okay, but what does that mean? That means making things more expensive for you to be able to get, let's say, like loans or car notes, basically things that you're going to purchase. But it also means for companies. So zombie companies find it that much harder to basically be zombies and be undead. That also means jobs. Meaning this idea of tamping down economic activity on some level is also tamping down on this notion of job creation and jobs. They accept that a loss of jobs is just a price to pay for getting rid of, or at the very least eliminating or cutting down inflation. So not only is Powell incapable of doing anything about inflation in any real terms, Powell is also, through policy, eliminating jobs. Didn't have to be this way. This isn't an act of God. I mean, however bad COVID was going to be, and forever the difficulty that was associated with kind of pulling ourselves out of the COVID gut. Yeah, that would have been bad either way. And we were seeing inflation either way. But at this point, certain minerals, certain materials, energy products, especially from the standpoint of the West of the world didn't necessarily go in on this. But that stuff is now at a shortage in the West as a direct result of policy choices. Those are policy choices. So now, all of them recognizing we have a problem. We have a problem. And with the conversation that Emmanuel Macron basically had with Joe Biden, well, Macron told Biden, hey, I had a conversation with UAE's prime minister, and he basically told me that they don't have any additional supply. And at Saudi Arabia, it would take months for them to just marginally increase the number of barrels per day. I think 150,000 a day over the course of 6 months or more. That is not going to work. That is not going to work. That's the conversation that basically was picked up on a hot mic. So all of this economic damage that's befalling all of these countries, large part of that having to do with the inflation created by the economic war that they decided to wage against Russia and these kind of sanctions that they've put on, they're also admitting we have no way out. We have no way to stop this. Our central banks don't have the tools to deal with it. And from the standpoint of our central banks don't have the tools to deal with it, we don't even entirely know how we're going to be able to get the energy at a cost that we could basically use to either heat our homes or, for that matter, keep our industries going. We have no way out. So, got to find a way out. So at the G7 conference, what they've come up with is an idea from Janet Yellen on price caps. We are going to try to forcibly drop the price of Russian energy products. How are we going to do that? We're just going to forcibly do it. Okay, why do you think that's going to work? Meaning, how do you think that you yourselves are going to somehow set the price for a particular product that you desperately need? How are you going to do that? What leverage do you have at your disposal? Now, what they would say is, well, we can pass certain laws against certain trucks or certain items. We can do that. But how do you force Russia to give you a product? Initially, you tried to force them to give it to you for free. That didn't work. And now you're trying to force them to give it to you at a price that would allow your economies to function normally, to create money, weapons, munitions, materials to give to Ukraine to kill other Russians. As I keep asking this question, why would they do that? Meaning, yes, it took a while for a reorganization of who was going to buy products and everything else. But Nord Stream went down 60%. I suspect a lot of that is political. I suspect a lot of that is pointing out your economies are not going to be spared for this. It is ludicrous to believe that we're going to supply you with a product at an extremely good price in order for you to use that product to create weapons, munitions, intelligence, materials that you can give to Ukraine in order to kill other Russians. You're trying to destroy us militarily and economically. Why will we continue to give you a resource that would give you the means to do that? It makes no sense. So, of course, gas, oil, energy was always going to be an issue. And the fact that Nord Stream 1 went down 60% sent a panic through the various countries, especially in Europe, especially Germany, because as I've read all of the other economic damage associated with it, if that goes to zero, all hell breaks loose. It is apocalyptic. And I strongly suspect that the 60% reduction is a hint. One of them even said it could go to zero. It could go to zero. And to make this even worse, there's a scheduled maintenance coming up in July that is going to shut Nord Stream 1 down for 10 days. 10 days. So, oh yeah, your sanctions caused a decrease in 60% of the oil. Of gas, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry, it's your sanctions. And now it's Oh, by the way, we have scheduled maintenance that is going to shut this down for 10 days. Sorry. So their plan now is price caps. We are going to implement price caps. All right, how are they going to implement price caps? The U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen proposed to tackle the issue with price cap. The idea is that the EU, UK, which are currently trying to hamper Russian oil sales by banning insurance for cargo ships that transport oil, would lift the sanctions for those countries that accepted to only buy Russian oil at an agreed upon maximum price. Officials say that Russia and oil-producing partner countries are struggling to find insurance for tankers, meaning there could be leverage to enforce a price cap in exchange for sanctions relief. Right here, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said Friday that the proposal will, quote, play a role at the G7 summit, unquote, which Germany hosts from Sunday to Thursday. Now, they are agreeing. They basically came up with a proposal to do this and say they're agreeing to this. How are you going to force Russia to sell you a product at a discounted price? How are you going to do that? Now, the way they're talking about is basically using sanction power, right here, which are currently trying to hamper Russian oil by banning insurance for cargo ships that transport Russian oil. All right. Why can't Russia come up with its own insurance? Meaning, how does that basically stop? Peer-to-peer. If I want to work with India, if I want to work with Africa, if I want to work with Brazil or one of the other countries, if I want to do that, why do you believe that those countries can't come up with other insurance schemes in order to allow the shipping to take place between their various countries? Why do you think that? On top of that, why do you believe that Russia is forced to sell you anything? The drop in oil by 60%. Look, I think that's a political thing, right? It's a nod. Hey, this can go to zero. Keep fucking with us. It can go to zero. The pipeline going down to zero for 10 days of scheduled maintenance. Again, hint, hint. Keep fucking with us. And now you're basically saying, okay, we're going to try to set and force you to sell us a product at a certain price. That's what we're going to try to force. What's going to be the response? The response is most likely going to be, well, you're not going to get it from us at all. I mean, they've been making $20 billion a month more, basically money hand over fist. And they've been able to find additional suppliers around the globe, meaning there are other people who would get that product. And they would be able to work out relationships in order to get their hands on that particular product, build infrastructure, all of that stuff. This issue is specific to the West. Macron wanted to have a global price cap, which everybody pushed him back on. And I suspect they pushed him back on it because what they know is that the moment you add one price cap, it drags the price of the other oil down in order to somehow balance out and compete with the forced amount that you're basically trying to sell and buy a product for. What will more likely happen is you just wouldn't get the product. I mean, think about what we're saying for the moment. If your economies are already in distress because of a 60% drop, and they're already in distress because you decided you wanted to have a coal ban and an oil ban, and you wanted to flirt with this idea of a gas ban. Okay, fair enough. You want to do all of that stuff. That's what you want to do. But all of you accepted that it is impossible for you overnight to flip a switch and find other suppliers, or for that matter, other supply at a certain cost, meaning you don't know whether you're going to get the supply, and you certainly aren't going to get it at a particular cost that was in any way commensurate with the amount that you were getting it from Russia. Meaning whatever your economies got accustomed to, whatever your public got accustomed to in order for heating, for that matter for food, all of that is going to change. And it's going to change for the foreseeable future. Again, you're going to have to explain that to your population, why this was so important and why you were dedicating so much time to this particular pursuit that basically made their lives that much more miserable while not accomplishing either target, either in the war or, for that matter, in the economic war, considering it basically just reverb and hit you and your countries. This is lunacy. Does any of them really take the step and think to themselves, what would Russia do if we did that? When they stole the money, hundreds of billions of dollars of ruble, or hundreds of billions of dollars, but yes, equal to hundreds of billions of dollars, but basically stole the reserves, the Russian reserves. I mean, what did you think they were going to do when you decided you're not going to be able to use your currency? Meaning we're going to continue to get gas and oil from you, but we're not going to pay you for it. Why do you think? Like, it's lunacy. If you remember going back to the first time they decided we're going to have an economic war, my response was, why do you think that they're going to leave oil and gas alone, considering that is the one thing that you decided to leave off the table in the economic war? And now the new harebrained scheme is price caps. We're going to, and by the way, does that mean they're lifting sanctions? Is that what that means? Meaning, is this a way of trying to save face? That they're basically trying to say, all right, we can't do without the product. We can't do without the product. We can have this conversation in hushed tones from the standpoint of Biden and Macron. We can have those in hushed tones, but our economies are facing a complete and utter disaster, and we don't have it out in order to fix it. All right. We need Russian oil or gas. All right. We can't say that because it would be a repudiation of everything that we've done up to this point, even going back 50 years, meaning from the standpoint of NATO expansion and everything else. It would be a repudiation of all of it. It would make us look comically ridiculous considering the damage that would have caused to our basic to our countries and our governing coalitions. And then to have to come out after all of that damage have taken place and say, okay, now we're going to scale back the policy that we basically was running with beforehand. Okay, we can't do that. What if we do that, but we do it while trying to look muscular? What do you mean? Okay, what if that we say we will remove sanctions and we will pay you for this product, but we will pay you for this product at a modified price. So it's almost like a negotiation of sorts. Okay, we'll get rid of the sanctions. We can't live with the way that the world is going now. The sanctions are too much. We're going to get rid of those. They're hurting our economies. But by taking this action, it makes it look as if they're being strong as they remove the sanctions. And again, you're more likely for them to not just give you the gas or the oil. We'll see. Who knows? I mean, this could be a negotiation of sorts where they are upping the amount that they're willing to pay to, let's say, market levels or close to market levels where it becomes, okay, fair enough. This is basically you paying more than what you were going to pay for it beforehand, so fair enough. It could be that, or they could be comically ridiculous about it and trying to cut the amount to some comically low number. Who knows? We'll have to see the details in regards to how they're going to basically try to operate this. But they would have to be able to lift sanctions in order to do that. And I suspect that the whole point of lifting sanctions is the feature that is not a bug, and that is done because it's almost a tacit admission that their economies can't function without the product, and they have no way out. You can't get it from OPEC. You can't get it from Venezuela. At the very least, I have a hard time believing they're going to give it to you. Iran's oil is already on the market at levels that were there before the sanctions were implemented. Where you going to get the oil from, bro? And if you don't have anywhere to get it from because there are no suppliers on the planet, and I don't think you have asteroid mining anywhere, then you have to go back, tail between your legs, to the previous supplier. And if you do have to go back to the previous supplier, how do you deal with that politically? And is it possible that the way you deal with it politically is basically by saying, we will lift sanctions if you allow us to purchase gas and oil from you at a certain rate? We will give you this for your vital product. Now, the catch becomes, will Russia do that? Look, Moscow, this war needs to end. It needs to end. And the only reason the war is continuing is because the West is dumping billions of dollars into Ukraine, billions in weapons into Ukraine. Not to mention the money itself just to keep the government propped up. It is basically a zombie government. All of these leaders know that Ukraine is losing on the ground. All of them get it through and through. German intelligence even make the point of saying they think the Donbass region will fall in weeks. To make it even worse, or that much more apt, you have more Ukrainian troops basically surrendering faster. If I'm not mistaken, Lizzie Chance is being surrounded as we speak, if not already. The speed of the events seems to be increasing as the, let's say, the morale of the Ukrainian military is decimated that much more. Meaning it seems that the speed of the advance is taking on a flavor or an energy of itself. And from the standpoint of this idea of potentially creating a strong point in, let's say, the Western Ukraine or mid Ukraine, where they can basically use it for incursions. I mean, this is, after all, Zelensky keeps saying, we're going to take back the Crimea, we're going to take back this, we're going to take back that. We'll fight with shovels if we need. All right, then stop asking for weapons if you're willing to fight with shovels. The point that I'm making here is, on the ground, the situation is dire. How do you end this war? How do you end this conflict? And if, yes, you're fighting a war from the standpoint of men and personnel with Ukraine, but the people who are basically keeping the war going are the West, then how do you attack the body that is keeping the conflict going? And the way you attack the body that's keeping the conflict going is by going after the thing that they basically need in order to do so: oil and gas. If your economies can't function, then your economies can't continue to give oil and revenue, or for that matter, keep the political coalition necessary for you to basically continue with this course of action. It's pressure. And so whether the West gives a decent price point or not is almost secondary to the point that they may all come with this option just as a way of putting pressure on the entities themselves that are keeping the conflict going. It is pointless. They see no way out. They just don't want to necessarily end it because they put so much political capital into it. And whatever conversations they're having behind the scenes, I strongly suspect that the language of the G7 of we're united and we're willing to go as far as necessary in order to win this, I suspect that that statement is crafted specifically because it is not true, that those economies are screaming. And whereas the U.S. is willing to accept all of this damage, is Europe willing to accept it to show how servile they are to U.S. interests? We'll see what happens. The devil is in the details, right? And we'll see how this unfolds. And I'm radically skeptical that this is going to have the effects that they want. And I suspect it's going to be like every other ignoble episode where they basically take an action. There's a boomerang effect that they were comically, ridiculously, completely caught rear and unaware of. And that they're going to scream, oh my God, Russia is touching us inappropriately in some particular fashion. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Thanks all. Be back shortly.